streaming. So I'm gonna call the meeting to order. Redevelopment Commission meeting for Monday, May 19th at 5:30 Central Time. On the agenda, I have the minutes, which Mac has emailed to each of us. Is there any questions over the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, so today we have RGL Solutions here, Jonathan Blake, who is our Economic Development Leader for Spencer County. And we are trying to get this in an email.
I'm gonna send this to you.
Oh, I got it.
Very good.
Here we are, retired.
I'm assuming you know how to.
Yeah, I can drive from there.
Okay, good.
Oh, do you need to connect it or can I?
We'll keep it close just in case.
Looks like you got full battery, so it should be okay.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hi.
I don't know if everybody,
No.
if you know everybody in the room.
These out.
I can let them introduce themselves if you want.
Yeah, for the record, my name is Jonathan Blake. I'm Senior Director of Planner at RGL Solutions. And as Heather said, we are serving in the role of interim economic development for the county. So over the last 12 months, we've been engaged in developing an economic development strategy, which our team is finalizing now. We will be delivering to the county here shortly. Actually, let's reverse this. Sorry, give me just 1 second so I can adjust these screens.
While he's doing that, you know, we have a lot of moving parts that are tools to the county, and I asked Jonathan if he could come and give an example of what some of those tools are that we can be more useful as a redevelopment, as commissioners, or any other areas in the county. So that's what this presentation is about, to help us as redevelopment learn what our tools are.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with your computer.
Now we disconnected.
No, I'm ready to connect, sorry.
Oh. Do you want me to help you reconnect?
Right here. Apologize. Computer's not reconnect.
I think you have to, I always have to delete it and then start again.
Well, while she's pulling that up, I'll go ahead and get started. So what we put together is a brief training presentation, kind of walks through the redevelopment commission's goals, or not their goals, but their objectives and authority under the statute, and the kind of powers that the redevelopment commission has in their toolbox, as well as the legal framework, and then put together a couple of success stories. So, we'll dive in at first to the legal framework. In the packet you have is an exact replica of this presentation. Before we get into the actual presentation itself, prior to joining RGL Solutions, I actually served in local government for 20 years, everything from redevelopment, served on the redevelopment commission in my community, served on the planning commission and park board, and then also did community planning and economic development. So kind of a varied background in all things community development. So that's kind of what, led me to RGL Solutions. As it pertains to today, we'll walk through first the legal framework of the Redevelopment Commission. So if you go to page 3 at the top of that page is slide 5, it says State Enabling Act. So Indiana has authorized, here, that's a great place to be, but it's just on the wrong. There we go, that's what I wanted. Sorry for the technical difficulties. So really the creation and membership of the Redevelopment Commission is set by state statute. Spencer County actually originally adopted their Redevelopment Commission in 1995 and then adopted an amendment to that earlier this year on January 14th. The board is composed of 5 members, as you know, all of you sitting here, but a county redevelopment commission can actually have up to 7 members. The adopting ordinance that the county commissioners would pass would have to state whether it's 5 or 4 or 5 or 7. In this case, it's 5. So everything I'm going to talk about today is based on that number. The department and the commission, really there's kind of 2 pieces of the statute. When you establish a redevelopment commission, you're also jointly establishing a department of redevelopment. They're 2 different entities technically, but the redevelopment department reports to and is governed by the redevelopment commission. Both the department and the commission are subject to oversight by the legislative body. They are subject to audit by the Indiana Indiana State Board of Accounts. And then they're also subject to public open door law as well as the Access to Public Records Act. All of those provisions of those statutes, and I put the citations there for reference, all of those statutes apply to redevelopment commissions in Indiana. So, from the open door and public access side, generally requires that all meetings be conducted in open session. Redevelopment commissions are allowed to have executive sessions. We'll get to that here in just a little bit. And then generally, notice must always be given at least 48 hours prior to a meeting, and that does not include weekends or legal holidays. All of the records of the Redevelopment Commission, all the decisions that you make are subject to the Access to Public Records Act. And all of those records must be kept on file in perpetuity under the statute. Now, the caveat there is there are some records that the statute allows some deference on. So there are records that are confidential and non-disclosable at any time. There are also records that the commission may decide whether or not they're disclosable. And then there are records that are automatically disclosable as soon as they're created. And the Indiana Public Records Act actually lays out various specifics there. For today's purposes, I didn't go into detail on that, but we can provide more detail on that later if that's desired. From the appointing authority, County Redevelopment Commission, again, we're going to focus on county today because that's obviously what you are. You're not a municipal level redevelopment commission. So the appointing authority, the county executive or the commissioners, technically have 4 appointments total. 3 appointments are voting members, 1 appointment is a non-voting advisor. So under the statute, the county executive appoints 3 voting members. They must be a resident of the county in which they serve. They must be at least 18 years of age and have no felony conviction or any type of criminal conviction that would result in a felony. The county fiscal body or the county council gets to appoint 2 members that are voting. Same restrictions apply there. And then the county executive also appoints a non-voting advisor. The statute actually lays out very clearly that that non-voting advisor must be a school board representative from a school board in the county. So now you have 2 school boards in the county, so you would just choose a non-voting advisor, or rather you ask them to choose from their body who would like to be appointed, and then the Board of Commissioners would make that appointment. For purposes of meetings, that non-voting advisor is not considered a member of the Redevelopment Commission. So they don't get a vote, they don't get to interject in conversation. They're literally just there as an advisor, so that they can report back to their entity, being the school board, what is taking place in the Redevelopment Commission. The appointments each serve one-year terms. So a person may be reappointed multiple times, but they each serve one-year terms. And they also serve at the pleasure of the entity that appointed them. Moving on to the legal requirements, and feel free to interject if you have questions or something doesn't make sense. Happy to provide some more clarity. So in terms of the legal requirements under terms of office and qualifications, again, must be appointed, must appoint someone that's at least 18 years of age, must be a resident of the unit that the commissioner serves, and then they serve one-year terms and may be reappointed. One of the things that is unique about Redevelopment Commission as opposed to some other boards and commissions is that each commissioner must execute a bond in the amount of $15,000 for their term of service. That is paid for by the county, or in this case, it could be by a special taxing district, but that bond is required under the statute, and then would terminate after the commissioner's term ends. They're also required to acknowledge and disclose any potential conflicts of interest. So if there was a pecuniary interest or some other type of financial gain that a commissioner might receive as a result of business being conducted by the commission, that commissioner would have to recuse themselves from any decision making. They are not allowed to benefit from actions of the commission. So an example would be you own 20 acres of ground, and the commission is thinking about buying that from you because you're right in the middle of downtown Rockport, or you're right in the middle of a major industrial development. You would not be able to be engaged in those conversations about that potential purchase. So you would have to recuse yourself from all of that. You would also have to disclose any type of potential conflicts of interest that may arise during your term of office on the Redevelopment Commission. In terms of the legal requirements regarding organization and governance, Indiana Redevelopment Commissions are governed by Indiana Codes 36.7.14 and 36.7.25. Each of those lay out very specific provisions for duties, powers, stipulations that must be addressed by redevelopment commissions, projects that they can undertake, how they work through debt financing, all of those considerations. Each year, at the beginning of the year, the Redevelopment Commission will choose from their body a president, a vice president, and a secretary. The president and the vice president, per statute, shall not have the same appointing authority. So if the president is appointed by the commissioners, then the vice president needs to be appointed by the county council. The two cannot be of the same appointing authority. Likewise, the non-voting member, the school board member, is not eligible to serve as one of the officers of the commission. The fiscal officer for the actual unit, so in this case Spencer County, acts as the treasurer for the Redevelopment Commission, so he or she is responsible for all of the financial reporting, responsible for making sure that all of the records are kept pursuant to the statute, and then maintaining daily balances of the ledgers for the Redevelopment Commission, and ensuring that those records are kept separately. So you see down there, the funds of the commission, you know, 4 very distinct requirements in the statute. One, separate accounting and financial tracking, so they have to keep separate records from all other funds of the county. So it can't, the funds for redevelopment cannot be commingled with general fund balances. They have to be separate accounts. Except as otherwise provided under the statute, redevelopment funds must be immediately available to the commission at all times. There are some exceptions to that, but they must generally be available anytime the commission needs them. The daily balance of the redevelopment funds can never drop below 0. So a lot of times you'll hear governments spending more than they bring in. If you have a special taxing district through a TIF district or through some other revenue source tied to redevelopment, that fund can never go below 0. And then, you know, the funds may not be managed or used in a way that's intended to bypass the waiver procedures that are outlined in the redevelopment code, except that if the fiscal body, if the county council, say they did not receive a disbursement of state funds to the general fund, for instance. They didn't receive it on time, or there was a delay for whatever reason, and because of that, they wouldn't be able to pay a certain bill. They can come to the Redevelopment Commission and ask for a loan from the Redevelopment Commission. That loan must be paid back, but that is permitted under law, and that's outlined in 36.7.14.8 of the statute, subsection E. So that is permissible, but again, you know, in very specific circumstances, and then those funds would have to be paid back as soon as that distribution is received from the state. Commission members, I mentioned earlier, serve at the pleasure of their appointing authority. They also technically serve at the pleasure of the county executive or the county commissioners. So a commission member may be removed at any time for any reason under the statute. Other boards and commissions, like the Board of Zoning Appeals or a Plan Commission, say that it has to be with cause, that it can't just be for whatever reason. The redevelopment statute's a little bit different in that there doesn't need to be a justification or a reason. It can just be, hey, we disagree with, you know, the direction the commission's going, or we disagree with the way this individual is voting, and so we want to make a change. So that is permissible under the statute. In terms of conducting business, I've outlined a couple of different things here. First, the initial organization meeting. So each year, at the beginning of the year, there must be an organization meeting of the board. Usually, that's held within the first 30 days. It should be held within the first 30 days. Statute actually used to say it had to be held on the first business day after the new year, or the first business day of the year. That rarely was complied with, and so this legislature changed that a few years ago. There must be an annual meeting that's held. So, you know, some redevelopment commissions don't have a reason to meet every month, and so they may just meet quarterly. They may meet annually. In those cases, you know, an annual meeting must be held as soon as possible, or as soon as reasonably possible after the first of the year, but that may not be a weekend or a legal holiday. Live transmission and archiving of regular meetings, so, you know, just like we're recording here this evening, beginning January 1 of this year, any redevelopment commission or board or public body that meets in the same location as another body that's required to record their meetings must also record and archive their meetings. So in this case, like you're recording this evening, that will be required for the Redevelopment Commission. You are not required to record executive sessions, and I'll get to that here in just a moment. But regular meetings, special meetings, any type of open board meeting, you are required to record beginning January 1. A quorum of the commission, that would be any 3 members. So if you have 3 members together, you are able to conduct business. And it does not matter whether it's the 3 members that are appointed by the commissioners, or, you know, if it's 2 members that are appointed by the council and one person from the commissioners panel. As long as 3 members, that constitutes a quorum and you can conduct business. As I mentioned earlier, executive sessions are allowed. There's very specific requirements for that, just like with the county commissioners or county council. But redevelopment commissions are permitted to hold executive sessions. Just like with those other bodies, you're not allowed to make any final decisions. Public notice must be provided stating exactly citing the exact statute for the reason of the meeting. So negotiating an industrial development deal or reviewing the performance of an employee. The statute is very clear on what is permissible under executive session and what is not. And so the notice must state that. The commission must also include a statement in the memoranda or minutes of that meeting, basically affirming that the subjects discussed were only those that were noticed, that no other subjects came up, and that must be certified and kept on record. So common uses of an executive session for redevelopment will include discussing details regarding real estate transactions as part of a commercial industrial prospect, interviewing commercial or industrial prospects, or even discussing records classified as confidential by either state or federal statute. So all of those examples would be eligible for executive sessions under the statute. Another kind of key point of executive sessions, you are allowed to bring anyone into an executive session that the board feels is necessary to further those conversations. That everyone that participates in the executive session is prohibited from discussing outside the meeting. And actually there's case law, I'm sure your attorney can provide it, but there's case law that very specifically states the conversations that happen in executive session stay in executive session. And that can get tricky, especially if you're negotiating a development deal and you have business to conduct in the public. You want to make sure that you're not disclosing something that was agreed that would be confidential behind those closed doors. Again, any decision that's ultimately made has to be made in the public, so at some point those details are likely to come out, but there are certain cases where things that are discussed behind closed doors stay behind closed doors, because you may receive information regarding a project, and it may include intellectual property, it may include detailed specifics on a particular manufacturing process that would be important for this type of development, and those kind of things are not disclosable at any time. Moving on to statutory powers, so there are very specific powers that are given to the Redevelopment Commission, different than some other entities in the county or in the municipality. So in this case, the commission may acquire and dispose of property, it may hold and use property, it can clear and remediate property. So if you have a property or a set of properties that were an old landfill and it was right on the edge of town here, it was an old landfill and needed to be remediated because you couldn't get anybody to buy it to redevelop it. Well, the Redevelopment Commission could, if it was in the county's jurisdiction and not the city's, could acquire that property, clear it, remediate it, take care of all the environmental concerns, and then sell it or lease it to a prospective entity. Redevelopment commissions have eminent domain power, so typically that's a power that's reserved for the executive of a community or the county commissioners. Indiana law specifically allows redevelopment commissions that power. So if you're, for instance, when I was doing redevelopment in my hometown, we were working on 5 different private individual redevelopment projects that were adjacent to a roadway. The roadway was our project, the 5 private projects were all privately owned, and the roadway needed to be widened. So we utilized, unfortunately, had to utilize eminent domain to widen some of the road, or widen the right of way so that road can be improved as part of that project, and allow that entire development to occur. You are allowed to provide for financial assistance for the purchase or lease of residential housing or redevelopment corporations. You are allowed to issue tax warrants, execute urban renewal projects, and then execute neighborhood development programs as well. Each one of those have very specific requirements in the statute, but in general, those are the powers that are granted to the Redevelopment Commission. Moving on to the duties, so these are a little bit different than the powers that are granted to the commission. So you are allowed to investigate, survey, and study areas within the unit that need redevelopment. You're allowed to study and combat the factors that cause or lead to a need for redevelopment. And you're also allowed to promote the use of land in a manner that best serves the interests of the county and its inhabitants, as well as selecting and acquiring areas that need redevelopment. So in this case, again, from a county perspective, if you have an industrial site that was a dirty industrial user, think smokestacks, heavy industrial, heavy metals, site needs cleaned up, needs remediated so that it can become another use, maybe it's light manufacturing or assembly or some other commercial use. Redevelopment Commission has the power to work through that process with the property owner, either acquire the property or help them get that cleaned up so that they can get ready to sell it to another property owner and another developer, spurring development. Some of the key definitions, I've just included a couple here for you. One, economic development area, you'll hear that word tossed around a lot. Really, that just means a geographic area that's identified by the commission that needs redevelopment. So the statute used to talk about blighted or deteriorated structures, it used to talk about areas needing redevelopment. And economic development areas are pretty much the terminology that's used now. You still hear the phrase areas needing redevelopment, but you more often than not hear economic development areas. An obligation means any type of bond, note, tax warrant, lease, or other instrument that is borrowed and which would be expected to be paid back. Public funds means any fees, payments, tax receipts, or otherwise that are coming into the possession of the Redevelopment Commission or the Department of Redevelopment. And then tax increment financing. This is the financing tool that's allowed under the statute that basically captures the increased property value or assessed value of property for a designated area. And I actually go into that in greater detail a little bit later. In establishing an economic development area very quickly, really you're looking for a couple of key things in the statute. One, is there a big economic payoff for the county or the community? So jobs created, a major employer that's attracted to the area, maybe a key employer that's already here that is expanding or retaining their business. Are there extraordinary tools that are needed in order to procure the project? So think of, going back to those examples I used of industrial, if it were not for redevelopment funds or some use of public dollars, that this project would not be viable. In other words, regulation of the property itself is not the answer and cannot provide for the future need. So, it could be poor infrastructure, it could be low land values, fragmented ownership, cleanup that is necessary from an environmental standpoint, etc. You also want to make sure that there's a public health and welfare gain. So, the project clearly outlines basically the public good and the public utility, and then that there's some measurable benefit, whether it's, again, permanent jobs created or kept, a higher tax base, broader economic mix, or other similar metrics. The statute outlines some very specifics there, but it just at the very end says other similar metrics. So, you kind of have some fluidity there that you can kind of massage that if you need to achieve the project.
So basically, anything could be an EDA. I mean, major is pretty ambiguous term.
It's very ambiguous, yeah. And you see you see communities across the state that take a very broad approach to that and will utilize that, the broad nature of that statement, to secure their projects. And they're successful at it, that's certainly within their ability. You do see each year the legislature is starting to claw that back more and more. They're trying to put more teeth in there. They're trying to restrict redevelopment in a way that they think is abuse. So it's kind of a catch-22 because then you get into the home rule versus state-led initiatives conversation. So that's something that we watch quite a bit, and we're engaged in those conversations. There was legislation this last round or this last session that was aimed at that. Thankfully, it did not negatively impact the statute. And then ultimately, in order for an economic development area to be established, the county commissioners must sign off on that. In the case of a city or town, the council must sign off on that. I've outlined a couple of best practices here. These are just general. I'm sure there's others, but these are just ones that come to mind. So constantly monitoring the TIF calculations. So we'll get into TIF here in just a moment. But also pruning of the TIF districts. So if you have a TIF district or an allocation area that, on day one we said, hey, it needs to include 100 parcels and it's 1,000 acres. But as development starts to occur, you start to realize, hey, these properties on the fringe don't really need to be in here anymore. The statute encourages you to start pruning that back and just only include what's really necessary. There's also pruning that happens as part of natural development. So you may set up this TIF or redevelopment area with the purpose of creating commercial or industrial development, but a developer may come to you and say, hey, we want to create this mixed-use hub that includes light manufacturing, assembly, tech, and motorsports as a use. But in order to do all that, I need a place for my employees to live. So I want to create this subdivision that's part of this project, and it creates this cohesive connection between the two. In that case, you would probably want to pull out the neighborhood from the TIF district and leave the commercial industrial development in the TIF district. So that's just an example. Personal property, in general, depreciating personal property is not included in a TIF. However, it can be under very specific circumstances. Think of industrial manufacturing, warehousing, research and development, those types of uses. As long as there's a purpose to include the depreciable personal property, then you can do that. More often than not, you're just seeing that it's the real property that's included in the TIF. Monitoring monitoring the effective reassessment and trending. So each year, properties need to be reassessed. Actually, NALA says, I believe it's every 3 years every property must be reassessed. So wanting to make sure that the trend of that assessment is going up, making sure that the investments that you're making are paying off, and then making sure that those investments are producing the result that was originally prescribed. Refinancing existing debt. So this is always a good practice if you issue debt for a project. As rates go down, or maybe you merge two debts together and get a better rate. Refinancing is always a great option, and it helps keep that your bond rating high. Clawbacks and economic development agreements. So we talk about these a lot from an economic development standpoint. So Developer comes to you, says, I'm gonna create 150 jobs, they're all gonna, the average wage will be $100,000 a piece. We're gonna invest, $400 million in your community in real property. But then, and they're gonna do that over a 5-year period. Year 6, you're starting to see that they've only hired 50 people, the wages are $75,000, and they've only invested $100 million into your community. You then have the right to, as long as the clawbacks are in the development agreements, you have the right to start saying, okay, you didn't live up to your side of the bargain, we're gonna start pulling some of this back. You can also, if money was contributed to that developer, require them to pay that back. So there are some very specific statutes that must be followed, but that is a power within the redevelopment commission. And then requesting a receipt of any share of savings from tax abatements that may be issued as part of an investment project. This would be important if well, I guess let me back up. You wouldn't want to TIF an area and abate that property tax, because then essentially you just cut your legs out from underneath you. But you may TIF a part of a project and abate another part. So in the case of the business personal property, maybe you abate some of that investment, but you TIF the real property, the real property investment. I've gone through a lot in about 10 minutes or so. I guess it's been a little bit more than that. Do you have any questions before I move on to the next section? I think I said it makes sense.
Do the clawbacks, do they apply to any kind of economic development, whether it's industrial, commercial, real estate?
Yeah, great question. As long as they're in the development agreement and you have the authority on, in the agreement, then yes, it would apply. But you would not, if it's not included in the agreement itself, it makes it very, very hard to impose any type of law. Okay, so that's why it's always important to keep this in the agreement.
And also the, not school board member, but the member supplied by one of the 2 school boards in the county, they don't contribute, or they're not allowed to contribute, they don't vote. Their job is to sit there and take the information back to them.
Yeah, I mean, you honestly, a lot of times you'll see the school board member just not participate, unfortunately.
I was going to say, with the new required streaming, that person could sit at home and watch it, I guess.
Yeah. I think the original, I don't know, I mean, it's been in session so long, I don't know the original intent there. I think it was originally to have a better relationship between the municipalities and the school boards. But, in my personal experience, I've seen the opposite happen, where you have, most schools are not supportive of TIF and things like that, because they view it as hurting their bottom line. And so you get this tension there, and so the individual that is often appointed feels like they don't have any purpose, and sometimes that's cast on the elected body that appointed them to that role, even though the statute's very clear that that person is not voting, it's just their advisory role. So they can partake in conversation with the commissioners, but they can't have any official.
Okay, so they can communicate during the meeting
They-
and ask.
They can. They can communicate. They can't urge the commission one way or the other on a vote. Or at least I should say they should not do that. Great question. All right, so I'm going to switch gears. I want to go into some redevelopment tools. I talked a little bit about some of them here recently, in the recent conversation, but we're going to talk about economic development areas or areas needing redevelopment, and then we'll talk about TIF and some other procedural matters as well. So first, the statutory designations. So I mentioned that there's economic development area needing redevelopment. More often than not, a community or a redevelopment commission to classify their projects as economic development areas. The standards by which they designated as such are much more lenient than areas needing redevelopment. So you mostly see or communities do that. The economic development area must be, when a commission is determining that as an area for investment, it needs to promote opportunities for gainful employment, attract new businesses or enterprises, retain or expand significant business enterprises that are already existing, and then meet any other provisions of the statute. And the commission must also determine that there is the development cannot occur by just simple regulatory practices. That may be because of lack of local public improvement. It could be existence of improvements or conditions that lower property values below that of nearby land. It could be multiple owners of land or other similar conditions. So on the left column there, I kind of highlighted, the main factors: promoting significant opportunities for gainful employment, or attracting a major new business, or retaining or expanding a significant business, and cannot be achieved by ordinary operation of private enterprise, and will benefit the public, and will be a public utility benefit. So there's or and throughout the statute. As you're going through an economic development area or looking to create one of those, these are the things that you want to be thinking about. It seems very specific. It actually provides more breadth than most people realize. Compared to an area needing redevelopment. So when you think about those areas, you had to find very specifically that one of those bulleted items existed, and the more you have in a specific area, the better your justification for the need of a project. So, lack of development, you could have that pretty much anywhere. So that's hard.
How does area needing redevelopment compare to brownfields?
So, well, the brownfields would be specific. There's an environmental concern. So it could fall under either one of these. Again, typically you're going to see those fall under the economic development area because it gives you more, a broader authority than specifically area needing redevelopment. But it could go in either one. But yes, the environmental contamination is that fourth bullet there. So the thing with
Is there a benefit to classifying a piece of property that has environmental contamination as one or the other, or is it just a verbiage?
it is easier and less restrictive if you classify it as an economic development area and include it as such. I mean, you wouldn't want just that one property unless it's 1,000 acres, but you would want more than that. But it would be easier in the economic development area. Areas needing redevelopment is kind of an antiquated term or phrase. Again, because they haven't updated the standards, in so many years. Obsolescence, age of infrastructure, age of buildings, environmental contamination. So those are very specific factors that apply. The economic development areas, you may have a parcel in a redevelopment area that is contaminated and everything around it is not. So if you were strictly going off of area needing redevelopment, you're better off in the other category because you're trying to solve one thing in a 1,000-acre, parcel area tract of land. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So yeah, in general, economic development areas would be easier. But because there's no advantage in creating an area needing redevelopment, you typically see, most municipalities use the economic development area as the method.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
From a city standpoint, can we use those dollars to help for deteriorated buildings?
As a city,
Can we use it for paint?
Yeah, you can use it, depending on how you set up the ordinance that adopted it, what the confirmatory and declaratory resolutions, then yes, you can certainly do that.
Okay.
If they weren't set up to include some of those projects, we may want to adjust those so that they can be used for that purpose, but yes, that's. that can
Okay,
be
we
used.
were afraid that you couldn't use it for like paint, but you could for windows and.
No, you can use it for any improvement that will help raise the property value.
And the check has to be made up to the contractor, not,
Yes, yeah. Unless you're setting up like a facade improvement program.
yes,
If you do that, I think, and that's a completely different part of the statute, I think if you do it that way, then you can write it to the property owner once they provide receipts that they've already paid for.
Okay. Okay,
Paid for that service.
okay, now I caught it.
Yeah. Okay, so moving right along, I want to kind of walk through some procedural steps. So, in determining, or if the redevelopment commission wishes to establish an economic development area or an area of new redevelopment, the first step is that the boundaries of the proposed area must be identified. So that's typically through some plat maps, general legal description of the area, really a tabletop exercise of, hey, I think this parcel needs to be in, but these parcels are owned by, so-and-so, and they've got something else planned there, so let's not include that, or it's really a conversation for the commission to have. So you want to create those first, and then you create an economic development plan for the EDA. So we've been charged to create the economic development strategy for the county. That is not the same as an economic development plan for an economic development area. So with the EDA, you're creating a very specific plan on this is what we want to see developed in this part of the county. Typically, that follows the recommendations of your comprehensive plan or your long-range plan, whatever that may look like. It may include goals that are important to both the county council, the county commissioners, as well as the county redevelopment commission. The redevelopment commission should really focus on territory where it anticipates it may want to spend TIF revenues in the future if you want to set up a TIF district as part of the redevelopment plan. And I say that because you may have a redevelopment area and you may not choose to set up a TIF or establish a TIF immediately. You may choose to do that later. It's very rarely done that way, but it's possible that you could do it that way if you know there's private investment already occurring there and you want to capture that increment. And we'll talk about that here in a moment. The next step is creating an economic development area, and that is through a declaratory resolution. So the redevelopment commission adopts a resolution declaring that they want to, or that you want to establish an area as an economic development area. In that declaratory resolution, you include some very specific statements, including that there's no split parcels. So you're not splitting a 100-acre parcel down the middle. You're either taking all of that parcel or you're not taking any of it. You want to include the plats and maps of the area. You need to include either an acquisition list, so parcels that you want to acquire, or a statement that there is no acquisition as part of this redevelopment area. And then you want to include, if you're going to acquire property, you want to include an estimate of what that may cost. And then also a list of projects identified in the plan, and then the statutory findings that we covered earlier.
What happens if any of those three bodies don't pass the resolution?
So, yeah, let me answer that after I go through the next couple steps, if you don't mind. So the next step is, once that declaratory resolution is passed, then it moves on to the plan commission, and they adopt the resolution approving the economic development plan. Their sole purpose is to certify whether or not it complies with the comprehensive plan. So they're not saying, yes, we agree with this in principle. They're saying, yes, this redevelopment complies with and supports the goals of the comp plan. After that, then it moves on to the county commissioners. They also adopt a resolution approving the economic development area. At that point, all the bodies that are involved in this decision have heard it at least one time. So if the planning commission does not approve the resolution, it ultimately stops. If the commissioners don't approve it, it ultimately stops. So if you were starting to hear that commissioners or the planning commission may not be on board, it would be important, particularly from the planning commission standpoint, to make sure that they're educated on what it is that they're doing. They're not saying, yes, we agree with the plans that the county has for the redevelopment commission has for this area. They're just saying, does it comply with the comp plan or does it not? And if it does, they really should approve it. Doesn't mean they have to, but they should. And so if you're starting to have conversation with plan commissioners and it seems like they're not in favor of this, that's when sitting down with them, having conversations, and showing them what the benefit and what the long-range vision for that area looks like, and helping them understand that we understand that you may have differences of opinion on practically how this goes together, but we need you to focus on, does this comply with the comp plan? If the answer is yes, then they need to go. So, like I said, after the commissioners have heard it and adopted a resolution approving the EDA, then a tax impact statement is prepared, if applicable. So if you're setting up the TIF district at the same time, that would be prepared. And then moving on from there, the redevelopment commission would actually issue a notice of public hearing. So up until this point, no public hearing has been had, or no public hearing has been conducted on this project. So once it makes it through those three bodies and then starts heading back to the commission, then you issue a notice of public hearing, and then you actually hold a public hearing before adopting a resolution or a confirmatory resolution at your next meeting. So the commission really has two parts here. You're declaring an area as a redevelopment area, and then you're confirming that that area is becoming the redevelopment area. So once it's made through the cycle, you are confirming that, and then once that confirmatory resolution is adopted, then the required filings begin, including making sure that copies go to the Department of Local Government Finance at the state, making sure that the auditor sets up her records, making sure that the commission's records are kept up to date, and then as you're working through the process and after the confirmatory resolution is adopted, notice should go to the other taxing entities that this has been passed. There's a general notice template that you can use, but that just lets people know, hey, this was adopted by the commission. Does that answer your question, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on that before I move on to the next slide? So TIF basics. So TIF is, like I said, it is a financing tool. Stands for tax increment finance. It is a tool that's authorized by the statute. Not all states have TIF. Some states have eliminated it. There are examples of communities that have done it and done it very well. There are examples of communities that have done it and done okay. And there are other examples that it has completely failed. Some important pieces about TIF. I want to start with the graphic on the right-hand side. So essentially what TIF does is if you have an area, let me use this tabletop as an example. This tabletop is land, and it's 1,000 acres, and you want to focus development in that area, or maybe you've heard that a developer is looking at that area, and you want to capture some of the additional increased property value from that to help pay for road infrastructure, water sewer extension, maybe it's fiber optic expansion, cellular service, whatever projects need to be undertaken to see that happens. You can, as you're setting up your economic development area, also set up a TIF district. What that does is, if the base value of that land is $100, the base assessed value is $100, it freezes the assessed value at that $100. Then any additional, so that's that blue bar along the bottom here. So it freezes that base value. Then any investment or increment from that, including trending, gets captured separately, and that increment goes directly to the redevelopment commission. So if that property, after year 1, becomes worth $1 million, and after year 5 becomes worth $100 million, the increment value from $100 to that $100 million is all captured by the redevelopment commission, unless you pass a resolution and pass it some other on to the other taxing entities. That money then is applied by the tax rate, and you get that into your fund, and you can use that to issue debt for public projects. You can use it to pay down debt that's already existing that benefits that redevelopment area. You can utilize it to fund programs or grants to local schools. There's a lot of different uses, and we'll talk about those in a moment, that money can be used for. The important piece with TIF is there's a misconception that once you freeze the value, that the other taxing units don't get any more money from that land. They still continue to get the base value in tax revenue. They just don't get the increment until such time that either the TIF expires or until the redevelopment commission says, okay, we're going to pass some of this through to the other entities. And there's a clause that's used, or a statement that's used, and it's called but-for. It's the but-for clause. You'll hear that used quite a bit in redevelopment. And it basically is saying, I think I have on a slide here coming up, it's basically saying that you, but for this investment, this project would never have happened. Now, again, that can be abused, and so it's important to make sure that you're taking all stakeholders into consideration. But the premise behind redevelopment is really to increase property values. So that's the new, or that's the increment. And then the orange on the right side is the total new and past values combined. And then once the TIF either expires at the end of 25 years, if it's the traditional TIF, or 50 years if it's one of the other statutorily authorized TIF uses, then the new assessed value that was created then is used by all the taxing entities for their revenue. Any questions on the graphic? Okay. So I talked about freezing the property value assessments so that when you establish the TIF area, you're establishing an allocation area. So that's the area in which the revenue is going to come from. The allocation area and the redevelopment area do not have to line up geographically 100%. There should be, some cohesion. So you can't say, well, we're going to acquire TIF money here, we're going to go spend money over here. Can't do that. But if, development's going to occur in a certain area of the community, but there will be impacts to other parts of the community that aren't immediately adjacent to that property, the redevelopment area might actually be larger than the actual allocation area. So you may only allocate from 100 acres, but the redevelopment area may be 500 acres because there's adjacent roadways or corridors that need to be improved, or you have to run a new water line 2 miles down the road to connect to existing service. So they don't have to line up perfectly, but they should have cohesion between the two. The TIF revenues can be used to issue bonds. I mentioned that earlier. Generally, there's a maximum term of 25 years on the bonds. There are some cases where 35 or 50 years, but those are very, very unique circumstances, and they require additional levels of approval. So I didn't cover those here because you don't see them. Property values, as those property values increase, even with trending, then the increment value is captured, and that's used to meet debt service on bonds, either current bonds or proposed bonds. As I mentioned, there's the but-for test, so TIF is designed for use in areas where private development would not normally occur without some public investment. So the but-for test ensures that TIF is only used for projects that could not occur without assistance. So applying that test, communities can ensure that those funds are directed where they need to go. Again, sometimes that gets misused. Not here to, criticize anybody, but you just really want to make sure that the purpose is clear, that the public understands why this is moving forward, and how this is of the public good. And then pancaking. So pancaking of a TIF is prohibited. Actually, prior to 2021, it was permitted. So if the county had a TIF district and then the city of Rockport annexed that property and they had a TIF and you had a TIF in that same area, they could layer on top of each other and you had to share the revenue. Now pancaking or layering is no longer permitted as of May 1 of 2021. But in the case of a county having a redevelopment area, if you issue debt on that area, the city cannot take that revenue away from you because you have calculated your debt service based on the revenues coming from that TIF. So they would have to wait, the city would have to wait until your TIF either expired or until the debt service was paid off and you released that area before they get that TIF for their area. Okay, only a couple slides left. I won't be cognizant of time. Use of TIF revenues. So there's quite a few different projects that revenue from TIF can be used for. Again, I talked about debt service earlier, but any projects included in the economic development plan may be funded through TIF. Utility improvements, road improvements, public infrastructure. You're starting to see public safety projects be utilized or be funded through TIF. So fire stations, jails, fire equipment, police cars can all be funded through TIF if necessary. Because essentially, you're saying that with this increase in investment in development, there's going to be an increased demand on our public services. So you can help utilize those funds to pay for that.
So basically for the jails, would that be more of the bigger cities?
No, I mean,
or is that a county?
Yep. Any entity can utilize TIF to fund a jail. So if that was a need and as part of a redevelopment project, you included that area, then you could certainly do that.
So we could
with
TIF
it
an
being a
area,
jail, I'm sorry.
we could TIF an area, open a bunch of bars, and then use the TIF for police. And then just create a massive cycle of.
So basically,
Kind of what's going on now.
if you were doing something for a jail, a fire station, for your fire station, it would be basically that district.
Could be,
For
yep.
a jail, it would be basically the whole county then, right?
And
So
you would-
now would your cities who don't have jail services, would that be included in that TIF too?
When you say would that be included, do you mean would you
If
get
they're
additional-
bringing if they're bringing what they arrest to our jail,
Mhm.
would that put them in that too?
Well, you're not collecting TIF revenue from them as a municipality. You could ask them to help pay for, contribute, but it wouldn't be through TIF. TIF would be a way that you could help fund a portion of the project, and then, if you need additional funds, then you would want to look at some other resources.
Got it.
But, yeah.
So how's that? Go ahead, Heather.
I'm sorry, but that said jail would need to be allocated in the area that you're collecting the funds.
Or adjacent to it, yeah.
Okay,
So you would want to make sure that is, so these are some of the challenges that we have at the state sometimes. There is a difference of opinion on whether or not you should be spending money outside of an allocation or a redevelopment area. And what I would say is, generally what we say is, it should be in the redevelopment area.
But,
But it can be in adjacent to, as long as you can, prove the need. But ideally, keep it inside the redevelopment area, or at least the allocation area, so that you're covered and you don't have any legal challenges later on. But ideally, you could make improvements adjacent to, and when I say adjacent to, I mean attached to the TIF district, not 3 miles down the road,
What about the part where you stated that redevelopment, who collects the money from the TIF area, allows some of it to be passed through back to council use, and then council could fund a jail
Yep.
somewhere else?
Yep. Yeah, so if you do a pass-through, so a community I work for, we unfortunately, the schools and the redevelopment commission didn't have a real cozy relationship. And so historically, we had issued 50% pass-through. Every year, we would pass a resolution that would pass through 50% of whatever revenue we gained, right on through to the taxing entities. Which is, in that sense, was to show, that we were being community partners, even though there was a dire need for the use of that money for the original intended purpose. But that is an option available to the redevelopment commission.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you kind of lay out, define, so you have the economic development area and a TIF district. So combine those, give me like the definition of,
Yeah, so
because they're using two different terms, yet they're overlapping over the same area, correct?
Yeah. So if you can have an economic development area and not have a TIF district.
Right.
So the economic development area, if you got an allotment of money as part of your annual budget from the council, you could put together a redevelopment plan that encourages redevelopment in that area. Maybe you create a master development plan for a logistics and tech park, and you could do that without a TIF if you don't need any public improvements. More often than not, some public improvement is necessary or desired, or assistance to private development is necessary. So the TIF is a layer on top of that you would establish at the same time or a later date. The economic development area has to be established either at the same time or before the TIF. But the TIF then is the financing method. So you would pass a resolution, work through the financing steps with, you use Baker Tilly or Ernst & Young as a financial advisor, whoever your financial advisor is. Baker Tilly is really well known for their TIF analysis. We help set up the TIF areas, but we don't do the financial analysis. That's not our expertise. But we help develop the plan and the projects and prioritize funding, etc. But you would establish that TIF that then would allow you to issue debt.
The physical boundary would be the same.
Could be, yes. Could be, should be.
But when you're talking adjacent to, we're talking like physical boundaries.
Yeah, so you could, again, using this table as an example, you could have this as your allocation area, or your economic development area, I'm sorry. But then your allocation area is even larger because you're capturing investment around it, and so that it benefits this area. Does that make sense? So they don't have to coincide. It's best if they do. It just keeps everything clean, but they don't.
So to do a project, say so your allocation area may be larger than your economic development area. Is that what you're saying? So they don't have to have the same.
They don't have to
physical
coincide, but they should touch. Anytime I recommend a redevelopment, I always recommend just layer them on top of one another. It makes it cleaner. Inevitably, even in this day and age, when a redevelopment area is approved, records get scanned, a map gets left out, somebody forgets to put a parcel number on something, and then there's always this question of, did that get included? Was that not included? Was it in the economic development area? Was it in allocation, where was it? And so it helps people 5, 10, 15 years down the road understand whether or not something was included or not.
So, more specific question. Say we have an area up by 231 in Interstate 64.
Yep.
And it was suggested that we put a TIF district on that area,
Yep.
just to capture any new development there. Is that?
So you wouldn't do the TIF district, you would do the economic development area. Well, you could do the TIF district, you could. You would want to do the economic development area first.
Do you have to have an economic development? You have to have that
before you
first.
have it. Yeah. So you have to have the plan before you can capture the increment. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So you just can't go out and say, well, this looks like an area, we're just gonna capture the extra tax off of this area because
Right.
it's booming.
Right.
And
There has to be a plan for that thing.
the plan is to get revenue,
Right.
you know.
Right, and, you know, you'll see communities that's their mindset, they think, oh, hey, this is booming out here, we want to just tip this. And then you ask the question, well, what are you gonna do? All right, well, what do you mean? Well, you've gotta have a plan on how you're gonna spend these funds, and you can't just do it to collect extra revenue and not pass on all the other tax things.
Well, that seems to be the kind of the mindset or the feedback that I've received from just, you know, citizens,
Yeah.
the county. Like, well,
Yeah,
that's,
I think
that's,
Santa Claus has one up there in the industrial park, that's a TIF district's really never collected a whole lot.
Yeah. Yeah, and
If
there's
that was their idea, they would make a little industrial.
but in their town, I think they've collected a lot.
Well, I was looking at one the other day, and it annually collects $1. This TIF district, I mean, it's been around for years, and it collects $1 every year, just because there's not been a drive to invest in that area. So, I mean, it happens, but if you're gonna, that's why the plan is so important, because you wanna make sure that you're executing that and then reinvesting it.
So maybe I'm jumping the gun, so how, you know, what would be the process? Walk through, or maybe you have an example, I might jump the gun on the example. So walk through a process then of how would a board like this go about determining economic development area? One person says, it's fine.
Yeah.
Next person says, we gotta do better here, you know?
So I'm gonna give an example of the area that you talked about, 23164. So I've actually had a couple of calls about that here recently. About that, I had a call with the town of Dale. I had a call from folks up in Du Bois County that are interested in how that connects to Huntingburg Airport. And so you take that area, you got the interchange. You know, no development there yet, right? You've got the truck stop that's being built, but really in terms of that, the rest of that landscape is a blank slate. So you would develop a plan or a strategy on here's how we want this to be developed. We want commercial up against the corridor, we want heavier industrial. And when I say heavy industrial, I'm not talking smokestacks. I'm talking manufacturing, tech, warehouse, R&D, but we want those back behind the commercial. Behind that, we want residential. So you start to layer this like an onion on your landscape. And in order to do all that, now we need roads, we need water, sewer, we need to expand or extend fiber optic, we need natural gas. We may have to help the power company extend their utilities into the area. So in order to do all that, you define a project, and a lot of times it's a phased approach. So you're going to say we're going to do project 1 and a project 1B and a project 1C, and you're going to take it piece by piece, and then as that starts to build out, now you're starting to collect that increment, and you can start financing other projects in that area.
How do you secure the land, the property, the physical property?
So you don't have to control the property to pursue an economic development area. You put all the property owners on notice that you're investing in an economic development plan for their area, and you want to set up an EDA and a TIF district, but you don't have to own the land as the redevelopment commission to do that.
Well, if you're planning roads and sewer and water lines, you
So
know,
you-
it'd be a good idea to at least.
It would be a good idea to bring them, have those conversations with them, make sure that they're.
Well, you need to option it, right? You need to make sure they would option their land, right?
But, I mean, that's an option, but it's not a requirement. So say you had 10 property owners that, you knew were interested in selling, they were interested in getting rid of their land at some point. You would start to engage them in conversation, say, hey, when you're ready to sell this, this is what we'd like to do in this area. We'd like your support on this. This is our plan, this is how we want to fund it. This is what we think it will do to the county. So you bring them along that journey rather than surprising them on the backside. A lot of times, property owners will think, oh, you're increasing my taxes. Well, you're not increasing it. You're just capturing that increase. So that's one option. The other option is you could option properties, or the other option would be you could purchase the properties outright.
Well, people who understand it, they're all for the
Right.
tax increment because they know that increment's gonna go back to infrastructure that's
Yep.
going in, most businesses that are aware of it would be in favor of it. On the property side though, there's gonna have to be enormous amount of cooperation there to even, even one farm, you say, you have one farm, well, that's, what might be in the plan, that doesn't cut it.
Right.
That's not enough.
Right. So, that's where working with property owners is important, helping them understand that the other thing that you may run into is, well, you're taking my land from me. Well, we're not taking anything. We've established a plan, or we're establishing a plan of what we would like to see there. But ultimately, in terms of development, the comprehensive plan is going to dictate what can go there. So that's why you want that, that's why going back to the plan commission and making sure that those two plans align. So the plan commission is not calling, or the comp plan is not calling for one thing, and the economic development plan is calling for something different. So the comp plan is ultimately going to dictate what can go there. What you would want to do as the redevelopment commission, or whoever you hire to do this, or help you through this, would be work with those properties and say, hey, we're not telling you who you have to sell to, we're not telling you how you need to, subdivide your land. We're saying this is our plan, for the next 5 years, this is our plan for the next 10 years. Because these rarely take off overnight, it takes time. And you gotta get buyers invested, you gotta get potential businesses that are interested in coming to the area. So it does take time, but that's why those relationships with property owners is important. But you're not dictating, hey, in 3 years, you're not farming there anymore. We're gonna put a data center there, we're gonna put whatever. That's probably a bad choice, but
So, like,
whatever the use is, you're not saying this is what has to happen. You're saying this is what we want to happen.
I'm saying if you go try to talk to 10 people that have farm ground in any one block, 5 out of the 10 are not gonna sell.
right,
At
and
any
so
price.
are the EDAs, is it typically a 5 to 10 year, or is it, this guy wants out, we think this could be good, let's go ahead and do this, or is it 60-40 for the short term versus long term, or?
Yeah, it varies,
Because what's the point of making an ADA if you've got Ben who's never gonna sell anything?
Yeah, so, in some cases, the EDA builds out very quickly, in 5-10 years. In some cases, it takes 20 years. So, the purpose of the EDA, and when I say putting a plan together, you're not putting maps together and saying, okay, this is exactly where the road's gonna go. You're saying conceptually, we think we want commercial here, we want office here, we want industrial here, we want residential back here. You're kind of laying out just a fabric, if you will. Think of it like a patchwork quilt that you're putting pieces together. So that as a community, as a county, you can start to attract businesses that want to go to that area. As you're doing that, you may need to adjust the plan. So there may need to be an amendment sometime down the road, particularly if, a farmer sells 100 acres to a residential developer. Well, that wasn't in our plan, but that's that's, we sold it to, and they're starting to build homes there, we need to adjust and make sure that we're in line with what's happening.
How much does it cost to have a economic development plan for an EDA? Because I'm assuming that's something that would have to be sourced.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they're not expensive. They're not, I mean, you're not, it's not, again, we're talking, let's say schematic level, you know, concept. You know, you're probably talking 30, 40,000 by the time you include, and it could be less than that for, you know, a county like Spencer County. For a community like Indianapolis, that same project, maybe $150,000, just because there's so many other moving parts and pieces, there's so much more analysis that has to go into it. When you're looking at an economic development area for redevelopment, it's conceptually, how do we think this shakes out? What are we trying to connect to? So we have, you know, a major interstate, we have 231, we have an airport to the north, we've got Rockport to the south. You know, what are we trying to connect? What can go there? You know, is it logistics? Is it, you know, R&D? Is it tech? And then putting together plans, you know, there's financial component, and that's a big portion of what that $30,000 or $40,000 would go to, is the financial consultant that's gonna say, okay, if you do this is how, if we have 100 acres that's residential, we have 500 acres that's industrial, we have 1,000 acres that's commercial, this is the tax revenue you can anticipate based off of that. And so based on that, this is what you could potentially finance. The financial consultant is the big chunk there, because it's running the numbers and making sure that, you know, the plan that you're putting in place is financially sound. Well, and making sure that it's not pie in the sky, because what you don't, you know, and this is where some communities go wrong, is they'll say, well, we want it all. Their plan is so broad that they can't accomplish anything, and so then they spend all this money for nothing, and they're not getting anything, and nobody wants to move there. Because part of it too is attracting those businesses. So you want to market yourselves and say, hey, we're here, we're open for business, we want to work with you. And oh, by the way, we've got this area set aside right here. This is perfect for your location.
So when you're talking about the financial advisor, is that a part of the economic development plan or the tax impact statement, or both?
The tax impact statement comes out of that.
Right. Oh, it comes out of it.
Comes from that.
So how accurate does it have to be if it's just an idea? You know, I mean, because industrial could be a lot of things, and the tax value can change. So what if that tax impact statement is off, and it's gone to the public, and the public's okay with it, but then in fruition, it's kind of off and on?
Yeah, so that's where then, you know, as you're working through economic development agreements, or before you execute, you know, any type of bond issuance.
Is that the callbacks you were talking about?
Well, that would be from an economic development incentive. Like if Jim and I are working together and I'm trying to get him to bring his business here, and he doesn't produce what he's told me he's going to produce, that's where we can implement the callbacks. What you're talking about would be, hey, we assumed that, you know, the total investment in this area, all those different land uses I talked about, would be $500 million. And you know, as you start putting plans together, it now becomes $450 million or $400 million, or worse yet, $250 million. Then you and the financial consultant go back and say, okay, well, the revenue projected or the investment projected isn't going to hit the mark that we had said, or the target we had set. So we need to amend this plan so that we can develop a project that fits that. So that is when, and that all occurs when you're issuing debt. So the EDA and the TIF is set up first. Then whenever you're, you know, pursuing a project and looking to issue debt, then you're reanalyzing that very specific project, because you have very specific numbers on cost. You have, you know, very specific numbers on what the financial expense is going to be, because you've got debt issuance fees, you've got bonding fees, you've got, you know, your credit fees, all of those things get added up. So, you know, on a project that we worked on recently, over $100 million debt issuance, I forget what the bond fees were in excess of $2 million, just the bond fees. So that all comes out of that debt issuance. It's not money that's spent up front. It comes out of that debt
The
issuance.
bond's gonna be 1.5 to 2%, right?
Hmm.
I mean, the bond fee's 1.5 to 2.5%.
Could be, you know, but as the cost goes up, or as the bond goes up, then the rate, that percentage usually goes down, so.
But at the same time, you know, we all have concern in regards to bonds and this percent of a fee. But if we take and invest our funds like we currently are, the money that we're making on our dollar to pay back the fund is usually more than the money you're having to pay on the said bond.
Right, right. So but that's why when you're doing any type of debt issuance, you're really diving deeper into those numbers and you're talking a very, very specific project. Here's, we're gonna build this road, we're gonna put water and sewer in, and it's gonna cost us $3
I
million.
mean, the last ones that were done was the AK Steel bonds, you know. I mean, they gave you all the exact numbers, and you knew exactly, you can look them up, I looked them up before, but, and it was all, this is what we're gonna build, this is what's gonna be assessed at, blah, blah, blah. Then you just pay everybody down, you know, a couple $100,000, he calculates all that up, and you arrive at Ben and Bentley, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, when you set up a TIF, TIF district, is there, I mean, like, he was talking expenses, like the legal fees and stuff for a project, I mean, just like the AK Steel, okay, that was a huge project.
Yeah.
Now, is it worth setting up a TIF for like a small housing, project, or, apartments or something like that? Because, I mean, you're not gonna probably collect, near the amount, and what type of fees are there, legal fees in creating that TIF? Yeah,
You
I
shouldn't
mean, gotta
have,
make
how
sure-
come then you wouldn't have to issue much of a bond?
So actually, residential tip was my next conversation piece, so, perfect segue. So residential tip is allowed. Generally speaking, a residential property is considered less than, it's a single structure, generally less than 4 units in the structure. Anything 4 units above is considered commercial. So unless you specifically set up a residential TIF, then you would not be collecting any increment on that residential value if it's under that 4 units and it's one building.
Can you say that again?
So
The
which
four
whole thing?
units,
So residential is or is generally considered a single structure that has less than 4 units.
So not an apartment building.
So not a 16-unit apartment building. That would be considered commercial. And so you would get the increment off that. But if you had a 3-unit triplex or a duplex, you would not get increment off of that. It would be excluded. Unless you specifically set up a TIF for residential under section 53 of the statute. But then there's additional requirements that are required there. So with residential, less than 4 units is generally considered residential and not included in an allocation area, or not be allocated. Anything 4 units and above is considered commercial. However, with a residential TIF specifically, you can establish that to capture new residential development. Again, paying for infrastructure, all of those things that we talked about before that could be used and financed through TIF can be used for residential. There's a couple qualifications. The main one is that the average housing growth for the entity, so in this case the county, the average housing growth for the prior 3 years must be less than 1% of the total number of homes in the county. So if you have 100,000 homes, less than, it has to be less than 1% of that, so.
is that?
That'd be like 5 homes for each person.
Is that including municipalities,
It would be all the homes in the county.
including Rockport, San Luis? And so 1% countywide, even though we might have growth up here that exceeds the 1%, we couldn't create a residential TIF here because we exceeded that 1%, even though we're not growing
In the same township.
spread throughout the entire county. We're growing very specific targets.
Yeah, so as long as, if the average of those 3, or average for the last 3 years, for all housing growth in the county is less than 1%, then you're okay. If it's greater than 1%, you can't use the housing.
Even if one municipality skews that number.
Right.
There's like 8,000 houses in the county, I think.
You say, repeat that one more time, because
The first part,
no, the 1%, if growth is over 1%,
if growth is, so if the average housing growth for the prior 3 years is less than 1% of the total number of houses in the unit,
So like if we have 8,000, that would be,
80 homes.
80.
So if less than 80 homes were built on average in the unit
right?
per year for the previous 3 years,
Which is the whole county.
then you would be allowed.
You would be allowed to do residential.
If it's over that, then you're not allowed to. Because essentially what it's trying to get you to do, or it's what it's trying to do is spur housing development.
Yeah.
And so if you're already
Well,
moving,
what if we built 100 duplexes, do them count?
those would count, yeah, because it's a housing unit, and so it's considered residential. If you're developing,
Well, what I was gonna say is there's been a lot more duplexes have been built than there is houses.
The unit.
I saw, I don't know, we could pull that pretty easily, we can get it right from Kay. Brian, we've seen that before, I don't remember. I was wanting to think there probably is less than 1% being built. But then last year we built all them duplexes, and we're gonna build a bunch of duplexes at Dale now.
So what's that, the average of 3 years?
previous
is what
3
we're
years,
gonna
yeah.
do.
Previous 3 years.
The average of the
So
previous
if
3
we built
years.
less than 240 houses in the last 3 years, we qualify.
So the Eric's point about residential and, the value of homes, is there typically some type of industrial or commercial component tied to a residential TIF or surrounded by a residential TIF? Like if it's duplexes and it's workforce housing, do the numbers make sense having an additional commercial component, or can a residential generate enough for roads and the sewer expansions and fiber and?
Yeah, I mean, generally, the infrastructure for housing development is less expensive per mile or less expensive per foot, however you want to look at it, than commercial.
Depends how nice a house you're building. If you're building $400,000 houses, it's gonna work out a lot better because, your supplemental homestead and your homestead credit and your mortgage exemption actually leaves you something left to tax on the top. If you're building $200,000 houses, by the time they take their supplemental thing and their homestead credit and mortgage exemption, they don't owe a lot of taxes.
Well, and that would be for the base value, but then you would still have the increment value. So, I mean, they're still not paying more, but it's how that money gets allocated.
So,
to the place.
with, like Senate Bill 1 and property values, how property value tax relief, do you see this changing over the course of the next, if we're gonna do this for 25 years, but, we're moved to more of a consumption model, do we screw ourselves?
I don't know that you screw yourselves, but I think what happens, particularly with Senate Bill 1, is, things like business personal property taxes were not really considered as part of that legislation. Residential TIF, not really considered as part of that legislation. But ultimately what we're hearing is that the maximum growth quotient in terms of maximum increase on property values did not change. They just capped what the increase in taxes generated would be. So, in terms of residential TIF, we don't know what the legislature is going to do next year or the year after. I can tell you that just last Monday, a report came out indicating that revenues projected for 2026 are 1.7% lower than what was projected like the last week of session. And so that has obviously sent people into a tizzy because nobody knows what that means in terms of all of the districts in the state. So I think there's going to be more to come on property taxes in the coming years. I think they're going to have to do some cleanup next year, things they didn't anticipate. And so I don't know what that's gonna do to residential TIF and those types of funding models. But to your question earlier, I wanna touch on that. You do not have to have a commercial component as part of a residential TIF. You can say, hey, part of this is gonna be a residential TIF. So you have to set it up separately. But you can say, hey, this is gonna be workforce housing and it's gonna benefit these jobs. And you can make that correlation, but you don't have to.
Have you seen a lot of counties doing that?
Tying the two together, not yet. You know, this has only been on the books since 2019. Not a lot of communities have really dipped their toe into it because it's nuanced. Some are. Napanee just did a project here a couple of years ago, but that project, those property values were 400,000 plus. So I mean, to your point earlier, you know, I mean, that's, you're looking at a different market than workforce housing.
In regards to the Senate Bill 1, because that's a real concern about what's the long range, is there a shift, are we shifting? One of the things that's been talked a lot out there is the residential TIF. It's not just the property tax revenue, it's the income tax revenue. Because you kind of hedge in your bet, because it's like, if we are gonna shift from property tax to something else, more than likely it's gonna land on income, because Carmel and Fishers is driving all this, you know, they're trying to get the taxes down. It's gonna move to income, and that starts to kill us, because we don't have enough people. And to me, the residential TIF is as attractive as anything easy, because you could get the plan, but you won't necessarily get the people who live here. And especially in the case of South Spencer, we gotta do something about enrollment in the school.
You know, like if you, so like if this rough math, I don't know when we do this, but it's probably pretty close. If we build a $300,000 house in one of these residential TIF things, I think your homestead deduction's $48,000.
Yeah.
And then your supplemental, then you take the $48,000 off of that, that's gonna leave you $252,000. Then you take 65% of that, which is 35% for the supplemental thing. So that would leave you somewhere that 1%, that's gonna be like a $1,600 thing. So each one of them houses, you could capture $1,600 or $1,600 in this thing. So you take $1,600 and you build 40 of them on 40 acres, pay $64,000 in 1 year. You could capture, and if you did that for 20 years or whatever, you can get $1.2 million. So that would pay to put some streets and some infrastructure in.
It would be an
And Alan's point is, if you get 40 more people here and they make whatever $100,000 a year as a household or $80,000, you're gonna gain some local option income tax money on that money.
We need more people and people that have really big mortgages. We need more people and people that have really big mortgages. They have really big mortgages, they got really big incomes.
Well, and at the same
But
time,
if you go out here and start tipping the thing, you're building $220,000 house, I mean, you're gonna have to figure out like how to make some standards of a community you wanna build.
I don't know that there is a such as a $220,000 new build.
I don't know.
That's
I don't know.
I don't know that that's even a thing, a $220,000 new
I don't know,
build.
what's the cost of a house?
You're gonna more time under 300.
Okay, there you go.
Unless you're trying to get something really, really small. And
But now, we're talking like the actual value and then the assessment, so there's gonna be a little bit of difference. It's not gonna assess as high as what it costs you to build it.
we're seeing the opposite of it. The assessed value is higher than the cost.
So your estimating math was a very good example. And in regards to income tax, that was an excellent example. And I think sometimes we forget about the number of heads in our schools that help increase those numbers per state is still at what, $7,000?
Per child?
Per
Somebody
child.
told me it's almost at 8,000 now. It was 6,400 about
So if
4
you
years
have
ago.
40 homes, hopefully there's 30 kids.
30, yeah. And if they made $100,000, you would above the median income, but if they made $100,000, and it's not all over the county, but that would generate, some local option income tax.
So technically,
$100.
you would pay back the TIF dollar for the infrastructure, that if you're bonding that out, it would be paid off before your let's say you only did a 10-year bond. You know, you would have your assessed value and any other tax that is coming into that area paid back before your 10 years. Which at the same time, you could also renew your bond and do other things inside your TIF.
So it
But-
just depends how much infrastructure you gotta pay to put in. I mean, I don't know, I'm not a developer, but I'm saying $1 million worth of infrastructures on a 40-acre subdivision, will that do it? I don't know.
Oh, yeah,
So,
way less.
so my next question here, people building inside city limits, so there's a percentage that you're not gonna get. They're gonna, you know, Santa Claus, I don't know where Rockport's annexed to, you know, but, you know, more than likely, if you want Santa Claus's sewer or Rockport's sewer, you're gonna get close enough annexed in there. That puts the county out, you know, off limits. I mean, the towns can capture that, which Santa Claus is. So,
Well, there's probably development potential to the west part of the county, or the west part of Rockport that's not in the city limits.
I think the thing that, because I've set these things, the different community things, I think the biggest thing when you start talking about residential, where are people willing to live? Because,
yeah, absolutely.
not to pick on the mayor here, but there's people that won't live in Rockport, and there's people that won't live in Dale. I'm not picking on any town,
I understand.
because you got these towns with declining population and no revenue to hardly work with, and you know, if it wasn't for community crossings and some of these other programs, they couldn't keep a lot of stuff going. And it's like, because I was sitting here thinking about the conversation, it's like, your EDA and your residential TIF would be, how do we get it next to the town so we don't scatter them out in all errands, fields, and running, you know, we're out here, we're getting ready to close the intersection of 62 and 161. 2-inch water lines running out through the county there, the services, or I'm not picking on anybody, but 2-inch lines out through the county, the service is not there.
Yeah.
And it's, yes, we have a lot of people pay by the road and leave me alone. They want that 5 or 10 acres out. That's who's coming here. They don't have anything to do with their town, unless they're living in Christmas, they like the village. Otherwise, they're trying to find a piece of ground out in the county, get away from everybody, and live the dream.
And under new models, that's not gonna,
Huh?
under the new models of funding, you know, the potential change of our funding mechanisms,
When you
5-10 acres at a time, we're
you're
gonna
find you're
this
attracting
way.
a different type.
No, you're not, because you're still gonna get taxes off of that.
One home, 5 to 10, if we're shifting away from property values and more towards lid, now we're taking 10 acres for,
But they're gonna be
One collection
working
of land.
someplace. Those people are still gonna be working someplace.
Right, that's
So
what
you're still gonna be getting your income.
right, but we're taking 10 acres and it's coming from one household versus, you know, surrounding the boundaries of these sewers where we could have 60 households on 60 acres. And so, you know, if it's people come here for 5 to 10 acres, well, if we're just planting them everywhere, we're not gonna keep up with the funding mechanism. We're gonna lose ag ground, which is a huge, you know, industry for us, and I don't think that's a viable thing. We need to strategically look at how do we get the most bang for our buck.
And yeah, that's a great point too, because, you know, the closer you are to a community, Rockport, Dale, Santa Claus, it costs less to get services there than it does if you're out in the middle of the county. Because, I mean, you need to think about the people that are going to be maintaining that infrastructure. Now they're driving, you know, in Spencer County, it could be, I gotta drive 30 minutes one way to go fix this water meter or the sewer and then drive 30 minutes back. So they're an hour out of their day. They forget a tool, then they're gonna drive back. You know, so I mean, there's additional costs, not just the cost of running the infrastructure. Running the infrastructure, the capital cost is expensive enough as it is. But if you can, that's where methodical and well thought out growth of those communities is important, to your point, to help minimize that cost.
While still trying to make the system, the funding mechanism be advantageous for the county. That's my concern, is that we get left behind if it does shift that way and we don't have.
It is apparent if you build houses, people will come. You know, they built all those houses out there on Washington Street, Pleasant, whatever that's, I think Pleasant Grove or whatever. And they were sold before they were basically built.
Why even the ones on Base Road?
Those are ones I'm talking, yeah, it's on.
Yeah.
So my question is, are counties in Indiana getting redevelopment dependent? Where people can't seem to come, like, just build a damn house on their own and pay for it?
All right, so you're specifically asking about residential development?
Well, and commercial.
You talking about a custom home, like if somebody wants,
No, I mean, it just seems like you mentioned, community crossings, whatever funding that is, these small towns wouldn't make it without that. How come the state of Indiana is getting so dependent on this type of, income to sustain itself?
Well, the community crossing thing, Alan talked about, just for that pays for roads.
Right.
So that's part of like when the gas tax went up, you know, a few years ago, then you can apply for a grant to pave the roads. But like it's $100,000 or something a mile now to pave a road. Well, the city doesn't have any money in their streets department, so.
and I wasn't being critical of community crossings.
No, I'm just saying.
That's fuel tax money. What, the point I was trying to make is, like, for instance, Dale, we was involved in that, it was $1.3 million on, Main Street. It did like 5 blocks. And that looks great, but the impact in the town was almost nothing. Because that was fuel tax money that's allocated out there. First County gets a lot of community crossings money and things like this. And it's like, the towns need help terribly bad.
Well, the tax rate's so high in the towns, it's really hard to get somebody to
Well,
move there.
and look what they got the tax. They got a whole bunch of old buildings and they got all these people with all deductions and everything else.
Right.
And they can't hardly clean them up. They're just stuck. And that's part of the reason I'm here, you know. We've been involved in this supposed strategic plan. And I hope to God it keeps coming. But I think in the end, the county is fine. Your income per capita in Spencer County, you're in the top third. And most people don't realize that. You're in the top third.
In the county.
In the state. Your county.
Yeah.
Yes, but,
The majority of the income's people in the county, not the cities.
yeah, if you took Santa Claus out, it's almost all in the county. So you got low income communities, very high income in the county, and you're not like anybody else. Name another county that's less than 20,000 people, or around 20,000. You don't have a hospital, you don't have an airport, you don't have a McDonald's, you don't have a town over 2,000 people. We need the county to provide leadership, because our towns can't do it. Santa Claus is your only growing community, it's a gated community. They don't even live in Spencer County, they live in the village. They got their own roads, they got their own street lights, they got everything. They don't, and I don't mean that in a negative way, we polled them enough. I live in the village. And that's been very, very successful for the people that want to live in the village.
I think back to your point, you know, it may not make sense for the county to pursue any type of residential tip because of the factors of, you know, it being right, you know, you're gonna want it adjacent to a community so that they can service the water, sewer, et cetera. So it may not make sense for the county to use that method. To answer your question about why Indiana is so dependent on this, that goes back several governors ago, and just a difference in circumstances that really required that type of investment. You know, once we got out of the financial trenches of where we were, and really trying to attract business to the state. I think that's probably some of the impetus behind it, but, you know, that train's been continuing to roll down the tracks. And so the legislature, although, you know, now with, you know, $2 billion shortfall and potentially even more than that in revenues, you know, they may be looking at different resources to claw back.
Here's the real deal. All these other towns like Evansville and Newburgh and Owensboro are giving all these damn people this stuff. So if you want a chance to win, you've got to either play by their rules or just be set to, or you're going to be okay with the population you have. I mean, just be real darn honest about it. Then people, and you don't want to trade financial positions with any of those people. Paying 2% local option income tax and their property tax is twice as high as what we're paying. You don't want to trade positions with any of them, but if you want to get houses, you're going to have to play by their rules because they made the rules and they're your adjoining counties. The only people that probably aren't just handing the world over is the people in Du Bois County. If you look at them, they're the number one financial strength in the counties, and then we're number two. So, but if you want to go anywhere around them, then Fort Perry County's put everything they got in TIF district, and they don't have enough money to buy toilet paper. So, I mean, you just gotta figure out where you wanna be at, but the rules by these other big towns, Newburgh, Evansville, Owensboro have made the rules.
Yeah.
I mean, in Owensboro, they tax everything you can ever get. I mean, they tax over 2% on local option income tax. They tax, you can tax property insurance, they tax that, and they tax everything. So they giving all this stuff away to get these people to do it, putting the streets and the roads and the water and all that in there.
Well, that's where we need school board representatives' input, because really, that's the, you know, what are you bypassing by doing the TIF? School, fire department, we're just talking about building a fire department, you know, one of the options to build a fire department. What else? Libraries?
Township, library.
Do them people not need some of that money? I don't know, I'm just asking.
But at the same time, your base, what they were used to getting before you grew, they're still getting.
Yeah, but as you're growing population, you're growing need in all these other areas. As you put 4 people in each one of them homes, that means you're gonna need more ambulance, more teachers, more gymnasiums. You see where I'm going with that?
Does the pass?
You can't grow one thing and not grow the others.
Does the pass-through also apply to residential TIFs?
Do we
Like,
have?
to his point, as it grows of what is.
I was
what
told
would
at one
contribute
time
to
it could be a
sustain?
percentage, like you could set the percentage of pass-through.
Yeah.
So wouldn't that help
Well, you
if the
can-
pass-through is there?
You can grant up to 15% of the revenue to a school district.
And then what about the?
But that would not be the
library?
pass-through. So the pass-through would just say, hey, we're only gonna capture 50% of what we're allowed to capture, the rest of it goes on through.
After
Okay.
you fulfill your need to get the roads and maybe help a little bit with sewage, why wouldn't you pass it all through?
Well, it depends if you want to, there's 2 ways of thinking about that. You can either pass it
That's a legit
through
question.
or dissolve, or you can capture the revenue and try to get a pile of money so you can buy the next property and do the same thing. That's just my thinking. I mean, I don't know.
I do think that's what,
As a developer and doing utility work in every county and every town, you're the redevelopment commission, this is supposed to be those times to brainstorm a little bit. What if you, just think, what if you did a residential TIF, but you didn't take the TIF revenue and invest in the subdivision, you did it in the amenities to support the sub. Don't incentivize the developer. Those guys are doing it without the incentive. You know.
I don't know, see, we don't have a too much of a Kirstein's development or a Jago Homes.
That's a whole nother subject we don't have time to get into, but.
You know what I'm saying? It's like,
No,
well,
you're exactly right.
you know, up at Dale, you know, that one, nice, beautiful. How does that work? You know, how do you need, what do you need to get that piece of property?
I think the developer's prepared to pay all of those costs. In support of kind of what I think he was getting at is, the residential TIF, the TIF revenue may not need to be to subsidize the developer. It might be to get some amenities, you know, to support some growth, you know, I don't know.
you know, it's
A
kind of back
daycare
to,
center, exactly. would be
if we
exact.
had a
If you had a
residential,
good daycare center, a really good one, it would incentivize housing.
I think our North Spencer schools are drawing in kids because of the daycare, they're coming from other counties.
Yeah.
I mean,
But you know, you
No,
don't
it's
have to necessarily subsidize the developer. You know, the utilities, they should, that's all part of it. It's all
you
part of
know,
the line.
I feel like our meeting
Yeah.
has been a great discussion, and, you know, we've kind of exceeded our normal meeting times. But I do think that what our new economic development, organization or consulting firm is creating from the strategic plan kind of helps us start this procedural steps for us to create what we need to create. We need to take a look at what this said strategic plan is that we're hopefully landing in the next couple of weeks. And then that creates us a plan for us in this EDA and to go from there. You know, I'm very grateful and thankful for all of you who have sat here today with your questions and concerns, and, you know, brings a lot of ideas. But I think what we've done tonight is created the beginning of where we can start, whatever that might be.
I think a lot of these things, just cat things, you know, there's no one paintbrush that does the whole thing. I mean, there people do all kind of different things with them, you know what I mean? So,
You can get very creative.
I just think could be the beginning for our county to start doing something.
What is the 1% test? After July 1, 2027, a 1% test and school approval are required. What does that mean?
So, it's a separate part of the statute, so it's a little, funky, I guess, is the right way to say it. The 1% where we talk about 1% of the total number of homes in the county, about that first bullet point under qualification. And then the third bullet point, affected school corporations must adopt a resolution approving residential TIF. That sunsets, and then it starts back up. So it sunsets on June 30th of 2027, and then they start it right back up. So they adopted an amendment. So after July 1, basically, it's just saying that continues.
There's no school corporation gonna go against you on that.
And
They're gonna get the $72.50 a kid. There's no school corporation to go against you. Cause they're not giving up, they're giving up, you know, a part of that.
Unless you did a residential TIF for duplexes for old folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody's gonna do that.
Yeah, well, we.
Boonville, isn't that, Boonville's plan is older retirement type
Yeah.
of community, and
But it's more of a part of a bigger plan. You know, that's not all they're after. A lot of times, those people are trying to free up other housing. They're trying to get them out of that, you know, bigger home than they need and get it back on the market. That's what they're really after, free up housing.
We gotta figure out what this number is and make sure that we've been.
Problem is, people in different areas, so
Well, like he was
that doesn't
saying,
bring your house.
this up here. I'm sorry, he made an example of this 1%. You know, you made a comment of the duplexes that were built. We don't realize it, but it's 2025. Those duplexes started in 2022. So the 3 years will be before us, you know, quicker than you realize. I know it doesn't seem like it, but
They started construction in 23 probably, yeah.
Well, that is a number I'm interested in knowing, and, you know, how would we go about finding that out?
You can get that, you know,
We
it's
get
no problem.
permanent records.
Yeah.
yeah, that's not.
And then-
Hey, Irwin knows how many building permits were issued.
Does that apply to cities too?
What do you mean, can you utilize that as
That's
well?
it, a residential TIF,
Yeah.
but we can't have more than 1%.
Right, so for you, the 1% would just be the,
City.
I just lost it.
Okay, real,
But
Yeah,
it would just be for your district.
Okay.
So, how does the tax work for property tax with homes inside of city limits? Does the city add on top of the county? Is that how it works?
Yeah, tax rate.
They got their own tax rate, yes.
Yeah.
But the county still, so like a home in Rockport would still count in this 1%, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're in your unit.
So like,
So in that sense, that is where K is not always on top of what each city or town.
The data's gonna be hard to get because she has a lot of home improvement permits and not new residences.
Does she have them separated? Or is
It's
it-
hard to separate, we tried to get them before.
I think in the past,
yeah, we got
yeah, in the past 2
Remodels.
years, we've asked her to keep that
Okay,
as
if you change it,
a document just for our review as
I'd be shocked
commissioners.
if you're more than 1%.
So in
Yeah, I
this,
don't
in
think
this,
that we would be.
so
able
a
to-
new building permit in the cities comes from the city, or does it have to come from the county as well?
No, it
It comes
comes
from the city, it comes from the city.
and that's a number that we need to get better
From any of the incorporated
captured.
towns?
The county would be the one that puts you over. Santa Claus and the county, the only two that's growing. You tear about as many down as you build. They're abandoned anyways.
Mhm. So, I think all of this has been great discussion. I think that we as a group should look at the strategic plan as it comes and then make our next thoughts. That's just my opinion.
So I don't have to change my meeting minutes. Financial report, I'm gonna renew our CDs tomorrow at German American. They were the highest rate at 4.1, the other ones were 3.8 and 3.6. So I'm gonna go over there and sign those papers tomorrow, so they'll be on a 7-month at 4.1.
So, do we need to make a motion that,
No, we didn't.
We already made the
We did it
motion.
last time.
I think you're just acknowledging that's where it's gonna be.
okay?
What about next meeting?
Well, I think that we should get the strategic plan and then look at scheduling the next meeting after we've reviewed strategic plan. Is that something that our jail is coming to present?
Yeah, planning to come in on, when's the commissioner and council in June?
That's on June.
17th.
Uh-huh,
Yeah, planning to be at that meeting,
okay.
both of those.
So then maybe we can schedule redevelopment either the end of June
You
or,
have a draft in your email.
okay,
Um,
I've got it.
or I want to send that to you. But you have a draft.
I'm gonna touch you while we're waiting now.
So anyway, do you wanna wait till after July 4th for a redevelopment meeting? Do you wanna go ahead and set that date now?
Doesn't matter to me.
I don't care.
The first Tuesday of July,
I don't know what that sounds
that's
like.
July 1.
Well, that would be a commissioners meeting. And I mean, we could always do a redevelopment meeting after a commissioners meeting. Do Tuesdays work for everybody?
That one does, I don't have anything else. What time
So you wanna just say, is 5:30 work or is that too early?
I made it. So,
5:30?
yeah. 5:30 would be good, if you
Why
guys
don't we
wait that
talk?
long.
July 1st would be the first, or the next redevelopment commission meeting. And by that time, we've all received a copy of the strategic plan from economic development.
What day is that on?
It's a Tuesday,
Okay.
July
So
1st.
that's your commissioner meeting?
yes.
July 1st at 3 o'clock would be the commissioners meeting.
Right, but you're gonna have it at the same time as our council at 5:30?
Well,
No, we
you
don't meet-
have-
We don't meet to we don't meet.
That's right.
We don't meet on the
The
first.
third Tuesday, yep. You're good.
Okay, so redevelopment, July 1st at 5:30 in the commissioners room.
Do you have a commissioners meeting that day too?
We do, at 3 o'clock.
At 3 o'clock.
Okay, anything else? Any new business? Any old business? I'll ask you.
I make a motion to adjourn.
We got a motion on the table. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried. Thank you. Thanks for everybody. Great information. Thank you for all your farmers for being here.
I have to.
Hey, don't forget to kill the recorder.